Hi, I'm Dave from boyinaband.com, and welcome to day 5 of my 7-day song on liquid drum and bass. Yesterday, I taught you how to make 2 simple leadish synths. Today, I'll be teaching you how to make a Spacey piano and some sweet sampled strings. So, let's start with that piano. I'll be doing things slightly differently this time. Right-click and create a combinator, but this time, instead of making it ourselves, there's a preset that just sounds amazing, so let's open that up. If we go into the Reason Factory Soundbank, combinator patches, piano and keyboard, acoustic piano, and it's Distant Grand. Don't worry though, we're still going to be learning about it. We'll just reverse engineer what makes it so awesome. Before we forget, we're going to name it Space Piano, so it already sounds dynamic. First then, I'll add in some notes, which I'll be talking about later. Okay, notes are in, and now we've got all these effects units vying for our attention like a bunch of teenage girls whose parents don't love them. But just like we would in real life, let's bypass them for now, and concentrate on what matters, making frickin' awesome music. So they're all bypassed and I've soloed out the channel. Let's hear what we start off with. A simple sampled piano that sounds like a child playing some surprisingly pretty notes on a Casio keyboard. NNXT is great when it comes to sampling or multi-sampling. Multi-sampling is kind of what's going on here, where you get samples of multiple notes of the same instrument, then assign them across the keys so you get an authentic sound. You could just use one note and stretch it the whole way, but then it'd sound like this. That's entirely natural or piano sounding, eh? So let's stick with our pretty sounding piano. So that's the piano. They've also taken the frequency down a bit here and lengthened the attack slightly just to make it a bit less harsh sounding. Next up, I'll explain how these vulnerable teenage girls, effects units, have been hooked up together. First things first, I'm going to move this RV7 unit, just this one, if we can, there we go, just below the compressor, since then it's in a logical order for the signal flow. Check it out, the piano goes into the mixer, you can see here, and the auxiliary input is on pretty high right here. Hitting tab shows us the back, which looks like Spaghetti Junction right now. For those of you who get that reference, high five! But if we hit L, then we can hide all the wires temporarily. Now we can see that the aux send here, if we just click it so we can see the wire, is going into that splitter here, which is then sending 3 signals out to the 3 different units here. The DDL1, the RV7000 and the Scream 4 unit. These all come back, if we look at any of the outputs, into the merger side, as you can see, of this Spider Audio merger and splitter, which goes back into the return on the mixer. So basically it's mixing all 3 sounds together in parallel. Then the mixer is going into, from the master out, the RV7 digital reverb, as we can see there. That's why I moved it up. Then that's going into the compressor, and the compressor into the from devices on the combinator up there. So let's turn these on one at a time and hear what they do. Starting with the delay. So we've got our normal sound, turn on the delay. This is set to 7 steps, so it's echoing just before the beat, giving a kind of trance-like piano sound that's a great start to a Spacey piano. Next, we've got the RV7000 here. The way the reverb is set up, it kind of acts like another delay, so if you have a look here, you can see it up, up, up. It's kind of echoing out, because the algorithm is on echo, and it's also on 7 steps, 7/16 there. This one's a bit more smooth sounding since it's still a reverb, so by combining it with that DDL1, so if we have a listen with just the DDL1, and then with this one as well, it has more kind of smooth edges to it, resulting in a gorgeous Spacey sound. And lastly, we've got this Scream 4 unit, which might seem unusual, but as you can hear, it adds a slight overtone to the notes, as well as giving them a sweet semi-lo-fi feel. So it's like you were playing piano in space, but the only thing you found to beam what you were playing to the space station you lived in was a dodgy microphone. NASA must have had to make some cutbacks after the credit crunch. Even virtuoso pianist astronauts were affected. It's on overdrive mode, as you can see right here, but not with too much damage control. We can see the mid-range is boosted to give it that crackly old radio feel, and the body type E is selected here in the body section, which I think is probably the biggest sounding body type. So then, we've got the real reverb up here, RV7. Have a listen when I add this. There we go. It's big, it's long, and it's slightly damp. Ew. Anyway, this is what makes it really feel like it's in space. While the other reverb just softened that delay, this one grabs the astronaut and his trusty piano and throws him miles away from his space station. Man, this is turning into an awesome episode of The Twilight Zone. Turns out the spaceman is the piano. Lastly, that compression. It's just a small threshold, as you can see here. So let's turn it on. Just squashing the tail end up, and the attack is quite small as well. Just enough to let the piano notes punch. And there we have it. Now for those notes. It's separated into two kind of call and response sections. And that's doubled, so that's part 1, part 2, and doubled part 1, part 2. For the first part, as you can see, I've used my trusty semitone again here, as well as that 7th in the key, which is the first note that it starts on. Just the G sharp. This all adds to the tension and thus the prettiness of the melody, but I've been kind and let it resolve to the B flat right there at the end of that section. So we've got the semitone, down to the 7th, and resolve. Nice. The second part flows nicely since it starts on the B flat up here, the higher one, and that's where it ends on the first part. So it jumps up an octave, which is a natural kind of musical leap that feels like it works. More semitonal goodness going on here. You can see I really like the tension of the semitones since there tend to be more notes around them than anywhere else. Then, I'm not kind enough to let it resolve completely, but I do let it hit the 3rd down here, which is a really pretty note in the key, as we've come to realise. I don't let it at the end there though, just reprising that little riff here, again, without the end 3rd note, so it sounds like it's drifted off into space. Take a listen. Drifting off. The second time round, I used both parts, but I've edited each one slightly. For the first part, as you can see here, I've added the 3rd note above each note that I've got here, just making pretty little chords for some nice variation, so that just sounds pretty much the same. Just prettier. The second part, I've changed the second riff reprise entirely, but as you can see, it's all living around that semitone difference up the top. I'm even cruel enough to let it end on a semitone change into the 2nd in the key, which is just aching to move down to that B flat, but I won't let it. I'm quite a sadistic person, just ask my girlfriend. Don't ask her about the bruises though. So take a listen. First part's the same, but then just wants to go down. So those are the notes. Now we'll move on to the sampled strings in part 2.